But the definition of quality has changed over time. Originally, it was really just defects or things that went wrong with the vehicle, things that broke or fell off or stopped working. But now the consumer has a much broader definition of quality, which would include things like things which are very difficult to understand or use, poor material quality, things that are noisy, and just things that are poorly designed, in addition to the sort of more traditional definition, which is defects and malfunctions. And increasingly, as the industry does a much better job of eliminating defects and malfunctions from the vehicle, the consumer's attention turns to these, what we might consider softer issues, which are actually just as important to them, if not more important, than the harder quality issues that we saw in the past. As the industry gets better and better at solving certain problems, consumers' attention switches to other problems. Consumers will always find things to criticize about their vehicles, and these days when they get in the car in the morning, they don't expect the engine to not start or the transmission to fail, and so their attention switches to other things. And again, it's a lot around the ease of use, the comfort of the vehicle, and just the sort of more perceived quality of the interior. And so, but as the industry starts to solve some of those problems, no doubt the consumers will move on to other things, and particularly around this issue of new technology. This is a big area for consumers, and they would include anything to do with the technology in the vehicle as part of their definition of quality. Often the technology is working as designed, and maybe 90–95% of consumers have no problem with it, but then you have the 5% who find it very frustrating. A good example is something like voice recognition. It may work fine for a lot of people, and for certain people they just can't get the system to understand what they're saying. It won't pick up their particular accent. I find that myself in my vehicle. But for those people, that is a serious quality issue. The fact that it works for 95% of other consumers, they really don't care about that. It doesn't work for them, and therefore for them that's a serious quality issue. So if the industry is going to bring this new technology into vehicles, which they are, and frankly consumers are demanding it, they want this kind of technology, they're very excited about it, they're prepared to pay for it, it actually generally adds to their satisfaction with the vehicle, but it's got to work for everybody. Particularly something like voice recognition, because often cars are designed now with the assumption that the consumer is going to use this technology. If it doesn't work for them, sometimes the secondary technologies are not optimal because the manufacturers assume someone's going to use voice recognition, and therefore something like the touchscreen or the old-fashioned dials or the steering wheel controls are maybe not optimal. So that can be very frustrating for a customer, particularly as they feel that they're paying for this technology, which they are, and then if it doesn't work, often consumers, particularly older consumers, will give it a go a few times. If it doesn't work for them, they'll just stop using it completely and just go back to the other way of operating the vehicle, and that can be very frustrating for them. With defects and malfunctions, most manufacturers do a pretty good job these days of minimizing those, but with the new technology, we've seen some technologies been introduced by a number of different manufacturers which frankly haven't gone particularly well, and so sometimes the gaps these days are really more around where the OEM is in the life cycle of the introduction of the technology, as opposed to having inherently better or worse technology than someone else. I mean, we saw Ford go pretty early and very aggressively into new technology. That didn't go especially well for them, but most of the other manufacturers are kind of going down the same road. So Ford was kind of a leader in that area, but others are sort of following and will probably go through something a little bit similar. So the gaps are not so much around better or worse technology, but often just around where the OEM is in the sort of life cycle of its introduction. But what we are seeing is that OEMs who are following are learning from those who went first and are sort of backpedaling a little bit and saying, okay, that didn't go so well for them, maybe we won't go quite that quickly or that aggressively, and maybe we'll scale back a little bit and not go full out with some of this new technology, because what customers are saying is it's complicated and they don't like it often. And so, for fairly rudimentary operations like changing the volume on the audio system, customers generally just want a little dial to turn, not to have to go through a touchscreen or go through a voice recognition system.
So Dave, for 2013, you made several changes to the IQS survey. What were they and why did you make them?
Every 7 or 8 years we update the IQS survey to reflect the vehicles that are on the road today. And because we have this 7 or 8 year life cycle, when we redesigned in 2013, we're really looking for a survey that lasts through to about 2020, because we don't want to change the survey every year, because that will drive the industry crazy. And so when we do these updates, there are two main things that we did this time. Firstly, we changed a lot of the questions. So we deleted some of the older questions where customers really don't have problems anymore, or those features just don't exist on vehicles anymore. And we replaced them with a lot of questions around a lot of this new technology. So lane departure warning, rear view cameras, blind spot monitoring, heads-up display, all of these things that when we designed the previous survey in 2006 really weren't very common on vehicles. Well, now they're becoming more common, and going forward they'll become increasingly prevalent on vehicles. So we updated the content. The other thing we did was to update the methodology. For 26 years we used a mail survey, so we would send a paper questionnaire out to customers, they would send it back, and we would collate the data. The problem with that is if someone reports a problem on a paper survey, you don't know about it until you open the envelope when you get it back. And so you then can't quickly ask them additional questions about that problem. So we moved to an online methodology where the customer completes the survey on their laptop or their iPad. As soon as they mark a problem, we can then ask them a lot of very detailed follow-up questions about that problem, because we have this whole library of questions waiting for someone to mark a problem. Then we deploy these questions, and what that allows us to do is give the industry much more detailed information about every problem that customers experience. Also, customers will write a lot more commentary around the problems on a computer than they will on a piece of paper. People just don't like to write anymore, but they're happy to type into a box. And so we are able to give the industry massively more information than we could in the past, as well as updating the survey to reflect the new technology.
So what should customers take away from these IQS rankings?
This IQS survey is by far and away the most important survey that we do for the industry. It's the one that they wait most anxiously about. It's the one that they promote the most if they do well, or worry about the most if they do poorly. And really the primary objective of the survey for the industry is really twofold. One is it tells them a lot about their own vehicles, how they're performing. As importantly, it tells them where they rank relative to their competition, because most manufacturers have a reasonably good sense as to their own quality, but not necessarily about the competition. So a company may be improving quite steadily, but may also be falling behind because lots of others are moving more rapidly. So it gives them this kind of annual sort of health check as to where they are. But the other thing it does really around their own quality is it gives them a lot of information about some of these softer items that we talked about. A lot of manufacturers use their warranty data as a measure of quality. Warranty data is good, but it only is useful if there's a defect that the dealer can fix. If there's no solution, there's no warranty claim. And so some of these difficult to use issues, mostly the customer won't take it to the dealer in the first place because they don't feel the dealer can do anything to help them. And secondly, if they do take it to the dealer will say, I can't help you, and there's no warranty claim, so it doesn't show up in the manufacturer's own internal records. So we give them a lot of information about these soft issues, and we give them a lot of information about their competitors.
What would you characterize as the difference between the best and the worst rankings today compared to historically a few years ago?
I mean, there's no doubt that today the industry is much more similar. I mean, even the worst vehicles today 10 years ago would be some of the better quality vehicles in the survey. There's really very few bad vehicles these days. Consumers can be fairly confident if they go out and buy a brand new vehicle, the quality is going to be pretty good. So the differences are certainly smaller than they used to be. But what we do find is that even some of these small differences have a pretty profound impact on the customer's satisfaction with the vehicle, their likelihood to recommend the vehicle, their likelihood to repurchase the vehicle. So even though the rankings appear to be narrowing, when we look at things like recommendation and reputation and repurchase, there are some huge differences between those at the top and those at the bottom.
What are some of the big challenges that the industry really needs to look at going forward?
Clearly right now the biggest challenge is this issue of the introduction of technology, things like voice recognition again, phone pairing, and some of these other technologies which the consumers are a little bit unfamiliar with. the industry is in a really difficult position because, as I say, customers are demanding this technology, and if you don't have it on your vehicle, it's unlikely you're going to sell many of your models because everyone else has it, and it's kind of exciting and cool and fun for consumers. So consumers are demanding it, but at the same time, they want it to be very, very, very easy to operate. And one of the challenges that the industry has to wrestle with is to design these vehicles, particularly the user interface, with normal people in mind, not vehicle engineers in mind. Often, a manufacturer can get a little bit caught up in the excitement of this technology and design it almost for themselves, not for the end customer. So what manufacturers really need to do is, as early in the process as possible, have real customers or representatives of real customers actually validate that what they're designing is actually going to be able to work properly in the real world. A technology that works in the laboratory or even on a test track may not work if you're driving at 70 miles an hour down I-75 with kids in the back screaming, and suddenly this voice recognition, which worked perfectly in the lab, suddenly doesn't work especially well. And so getting that kind of real world viewpoint into the design and development process is absolutely critical for the manufacturers.
In addition to the IQS survey, you also have a dependability survey and an appeal survey. That would be the automotive performance, execution, and layout survey. What is the difference between these? How do they complement each other? How do they contrast each other?
IQS and appeal are siblings, if you will. We actually ask both surveys of the same customer. So someone completes the IQS portion, then they complete the appeal portion. The IQS portion is asking them, what is it that you consider a quality problem with your vehicle? The appeal portion is really, what is it that has surprised, delighted, excited you about your vehicle? And so it looks at issues like styling, performance, comfort, features, utility, use of space. And so appeal is kind of all about the things that people love about their vehicles. And IQS is about the relatively small number of things that they really don't like about their vehicles. And what we find is quite interesting, that there's almost no correlation between the two. You have a lot of vehicles which are very good at one and not so good at the other, and then a lot of vehicles which are the other way round. It's quite a hard challenge to be very, very good at both, but some manage it. So those two complement each other very nicely. The dependability study is a little bit like the initial quality study done 3 years later, but is really focused just on the hard defects. So after 3 years of ownership, we ask customers, what is broken, what's worn out, what's fallen off, what's needed replacing, what's become noisy. And so it's a true dependability study. And the initial quality study is a pretty good predictor of dependability. And in some ways, a dependability study is the most important because this is after 3 years of ownership, not after 3 months of ownership. And so it's kind of the time where customers are starting to think about replacing the vehicle. And what we know is that dependability has a very, very, very strong impact on whether or not they're actually going to buy the same brand of vehicle again. So these 3 studies, I feel, really complement each other very well.